Hey everyone, it's getting harder and harder every day for these authoritarian collectivists. Well, in particular, so far, well, right now, these liberals who are in power in this country to keep their story straight in regards to the mass immigration push that, yeah, it started under the Harper regime, but it was massively ramped up under the federal liberals. Like I say, both sides of that libcon bird have vested interests and lobbyists that they got to appeal to in order to maintain this current economic Ponzi scheme that we're all currently living under. Their original thought process is let's just flood the Canadian population with a whole lot of immigrants and hope that that'll expand the GDP somehow, as if that's the most important thing, right? And that should alleviate Canadians' concern, because once they see the economy's growing, I guess everyone's told that, well, as long as the economy's growing, everyone will just go along, do whatever needs to be done, and not get too upset or revolt against the ruling class. That's what they've been told, and historically, that has been the case. But mass immigration is not just something that has to do with economics. It also has to do with what a lot of people are saying or suggesting, which is creating the great replacement, or forcing old stock Canadians to race down to compete with people who come from third world or emerging countries. Most of the people in the Western world were used to the whole pretense of trying to better themselves or to gain some form of advantage. I'm sure a lot of them never suspected they would have to turn around and head the other direction and keep racing lower and lower and lower to some common denominator which is way, way below what most Canadians or what most Westerners would ever want to put up with. Once you've achieved or attained a certain amount of success, yeah, that becomes very, very sticky. And it's profoundly difficult to try to convince an entire population of those old stock Canadians that they shouldn't be concerned with their own personal prosperity. They should be more concerned with reducing their own personal prosperity in order to share that with people from countries halfway around the world. Or to bring them here and share with them rather than their children or grandchildren. I think most Canadians, like I say, their loyalties, or at least I hope at this point in time, would be if you're going to take my money, if you're going to forcefully redistribute my wealth or my income, well, I think most Canadians would prefer that goes to their own children or their grandchildren, or people that they perceive as their extended family, rather than strangers that some figurehead in the UN dictated had more superiority or supremacy in regards to who should be the benefactor or the beneficiary of that forced wealth and income redistributive model. But even with all of that forced wealth and income redistribution and all that central planning and all that mass immigration that, like I say, started under the Harper regime, has been ramped up under the Liberal regime, it's still not proven to be beneficial even for those that they pretend to really care about, which are foreigners or these immigrants or so-called refugees or asylum seekers. The reality of it is that they're even suffering as a consequence of these central planning initiatives. Headline out of CBC News Politics, growing number of newcomers, refugees ending up homeless in Canada, studies. There's just not enough affordable housing options, expert says. It's being reported by Teresa Wright, the Canadian Press, August 9th, 2019. Well, let's listen to what this expert has to say, all right? A growing number of newcomers to Canada are ended up in shelters or are finding themselves homeless, newly released government figures show. Way to create more homelessness in Canada, Trudeau. Good job. As if you haven't done, based on your economic policy so far, as if you haven't already caused enough of the old stock Canadians to be homeless or to be the working poor. Now you even want to bring newcomers or these so-called immigrants to this country to join them, do you? That's not very diverse. That sounds like you want even these immigrants or these asylum seekers or refugees to join old stock Canadians as being homeless or the working poor. Is that how you create equality in Canada, Trudeau? Make sure not just the old stock Canadians, but even the newcomers are all equally poor or homeless at the same time. I guess that's the kind of equality that Trudeau stands for, right? And his mindless minions as well. Two new reports released this week by Employment and Social Development Canada offer a glimpse into the extent of the homelessness problem across the country and reveal the populations that are most vulnerable. The National Shelter Study, which looked at federal data on shelter users between 2005 and 2016, found an observable increase in refugees using shelters. Well, that also happens for a lot of the old stock Canadians as well because of the ridiculous overinflated housing bubble in this country, or the fact that they basically plunder the productive wealth or the income of Canadians to the tune of almost half it. So Canadians just can't afford anything more than to live homeless these days, or at least a substantial portion of the population, all as a direct consequence as a result of these big government initiatives. In 2016, there were 2,000 refugees sleeping in shelters, not counting those facilities designated specifically for refugees. An increase from 1,000 just 2 years earlier when the figures first began to be tracked. Tim Richter, president of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, said he believes refugees are being forced to turn to homeless shelters because of a lack of housing capacity in areas where refugees are settling. Many of them are coming to Toronto in Ontario and to Quebec, and in those communities, the rental market is just really tight, and we just don't have the capacity to house them, Richter said. if you can't, the old stock Canadians, like I said, once again, I don't know. These people just don't seem to care about the average Canadian. Like I say, and it's a CBC personality or someone that's contributed to that, or maybe the CBC just trying to present what this person's saying in a manner that, anyways, like I say, you just can't figure out the mindset of these people for the most part, because it's hard to determine what they're trying to do, because they're mindless order followers that just do what they're told. So is it them saying this stuff under their own fruition, or are they being forced to say this stuff? I don't know. Like I said, either way, but the fact that why, since you already know that the domestic population, those old stock Canadians, are already suffering severely, or at least a substantial or a large portion of them are. We've seen all the facts and statistics, right? There's a large percentage of the working age Canadian population in this country that are way below or underwater in terms of not just debt obligations, but not even be able to thrive and survive economically without some hand up or handout from someone else or big government to help them in some way, in some capacity. Like, people should be in an economic position once you become an adult that you can take care of yourself and sustain your own livelihood. But once again, under this quasi or now becoming more and more socialist model that Canada is, and that's an unfortunate thing, that, hey, it is a reality. But once again, that race to the lowest common denominator, that kind of authoritarian collectivism is greatly contributing to not just this race to the bottom, but for larger and larger portions of the population being left out and not having what they provide to society properly rewarded or compensated. That's just a reality. So the fact that this article is going to be more focused on the refugees, and I feel bad for these people. Like I say, it's terrible, but hey, you are foolish, you're naive enough to believe the politicians in this country or Trudeau, then listen, I guess in some way, once again, personal responsibility goes a long way, and stop falling for the rhetoric of these authoritarian collectivists. That's the one thing I would say first and foremost to anyone, whether you're a refugee, an immigrant, or asylum seeker, or an old stock Canadian. Stop falling for the political rhetoric of these people that pretend that they're benevolent in some way. They're not. They're not. They want to be your rulers. They want to make out some kind of economic benefit or advantage at your expense. Trudeau, like I say, all they care about at the end of the day is hopefully expanding the GDP to alleviate the concerns of the bondholders that realize that they're underwater and getting a negative return rate at this point in time, right? So that's all it is at the end of the day. It's economic manipulation, screwing a whole lot of people, not just old stock Canadians, but these newcomers and these immigrants, screwing a whole lot of people over for some pretense that hopefully it'll work out beneficial enough for these central planners or the Canadians or other investors who bought up Canadians' bonds. Like I said, you were foolish enough to invest in a country that's been going down, down, down for a long time. The only thing is, I guess, because a lot of Canadians have been resting on the laurels of people way in the past, a lot of those economically prosperous and entrepreneurial people in the past that did actually build this country based on free market fundamentals. You're still resting on the laurels of those people, but those people are long gone. And you've been coasting along for decades now on the residual effects of that. Because it's not happened so much in Canada. Because if you had that much economic prosperity, at the level these authoritarian collectivists suggest, well, we wouldn't have the debt and deficit levels, whether you're talking personal debt, household debt, provincial debt, or federal debt. All of them are at record high levels at this point in this country. So where's the economic prosperity? Like, think about it. If you eat, forget about thinking things in the macro picture. Just think about even for you in your own personal situation. When would you actually truly deem or consider yourself to be wealthy? Would it be if you had more debts than what you're bringing in? No, that's not wealth. That's borrowed prosperity. That's not promised you for the rest of your life. It's only promised you now, and that requires that you own up to your debt obligations. So you can enjoy the benefit now, But you don't know how that's going to play out in the future. Same goes for in this country in terms of the provincial or debt levels. Everyone's trying to pretend that they're all living wealthy. A lot of these elitists or these authoritarian collectivists are living on borrowed time or debts and deficits that they are forcing and thrusting on successive generations or the unborn. So where's this wealth? Where's this prosperity? It's all built on a house of cards and speculation. It doesn't actually exist tangibly. Even the GDP numbers or the stock market valuations or the housing market valuations, they might exist on a computer screen somewhere, but that can change on a dime, as we know. So it's all built on a house of cards. It's all built on speculation. It's all built upon a Ponzi scheme that, like I say, it cannot sustain itself forever. At some point in time, the house of cards is going to come tumbling down. And that will be the time when the Canadian population will finally get to see that, yeah, the emperor truly had no clothes all along. And all the rhetoric that was espoused to prop up that central planning model, it'll be dispelled and proven as a myth in an instant. And make no mistake, that time is coming and it's fast approaching. It's Canadian Libertarian, and I love liberty.